did not intend for it to take me 7 years before reviewing Persona again, and yet, here we are. For those who are newer around here, back in 2017, I spent the early side of the year discussing Persona 4 Golden right before the release of Persona 5, and I really liked the trip to Inaba that presented. I liked it so much that I bought Persona 5 Special Edition on launch and streamed it day one. That stream has sadly been lost to time, and for a dumb reason. Atlus putting out official policy that players could not stream the game past a certain date to prevent new audiences from getting barraged with spoilers. Which is and remains a ridiculous policy, as people are going to discuss spoilers. Not just via streaming, in text posts, on social media, in other scripted videos, in podcasts, and on the franchise's fricking wiki. You can't control the flow of information that way, and Atlus's own accounts violated this policy themselves. Everyone rightfully pushed back and told them what nonsense it was, as it didn't even do the intended task of preserving the twists and story decisions they made for the game. As if you played the game with Japanese audio, you instantly knew all the twists thanks to actor illusion. Hell, it harmed the game more than anything, as after Atlus did it, players then began to deliberately look for and at times make up things that were wrong with it just out of spite towards this. The only thing this policy succeeded in doing was growing and giving greater voice to a toxic fan base. One Atlus made worse with their multi-platform re-releases of Personas 3 and 4 and tried to do this again, when both were over a decade old by this point. Then going so far as to hit videos talking about the games that had been out for years before this newest distribution, being hit with fraudulent copyright claims, including my own, which all discourages discussion and promotion of them. And this is unfortunately where I need to actually start this video, as since I released those Persona 4 videos, I've just ended up barraged with bad take after bad take on the series that ignores the actual content of the game or the decisions about them. And as much as Atlus royally fucked up with this policy, it just as much made me not want to engage with or take the side of the fandom either, with just how bad many of these deliberately ignorant perspectives are. Such as the original release of Persona 3 or of its FES extension being superior over Persona 3 Portable, and the endless raging over the latter. My response to that one is, while there are some fair points on the differences, it's not bad in the way that keeps being claimed, as it did fix a lot of things that made P3 unplayable. In the original Persona 3, you can't control party members, and your party healer Mitsuru Kirijo will only cast Marin Kaorin instead of performing her actual party role. So you'll lose fights constantly in that game through no fault of your own. Persona 3 Portable actually fixed not just the battle system, but on a game coding level is a completely different game from the ground up. Like, look up how the final boss of the original was programmed, and it's actually astounding the original Persona 3 was even playable with how bad the coding actually was. Yes, one can be disappointed that Persona 3 Portable did not give the same experience as the original, especially if you're not a visual novel fan. But Persona already tells a lot of its story as a visual novel, so that's not that huge a difference to me. Hell, a lot of P3P's decisions are understandable from the perspective of, if you actually go back to the old forum posts, how much fans hated not just the game's original ending, but the FES extended story, The Answer, due to both making it feel like suffering through the original version's bad mechanics and story decisions was not worth it. And then there's all the bad takes around Persona 4, where the critics of the game deliberately ignore what it actually does and make up their own interpretations of what the game is about. To say the story was lying about the game being about overcoming your insecurities to become your true self, and instead claim it forced their cast members to conform to societal expectations, which is entirely bullshit if you in any way put things in cultural context of being a Japanese game and then commenting on Japanese societal expectations, not Western ones the game was wrongly judged by, to show that, no, the true selves of the cast were not conforming at all. Now, I admit, when I reviewed Persona 4, I fell a bit into this trap myself when discussing the social link of Yukiko Amagi. I felt she was giving up on the opportunities to grow or expand her knowledge to better run her family's inn by just staying to join the workforce there instead of taking a chance to study abroad before coming back, when the inn, as it was struggling to adapt with the times. But she stayed for the well-being of her family, which she could just not abandon, and that's a respectable and understandable reason considering the entirety of her internal crisis is focused on how she felt trapped by the perception of obligation when there wasn't in the way she'd assumed. which was the lie she had to confront. She was a bird trapped in a cage of her own making. Hell, if she really didn't want to run her family's inn, there were ways to get around that. As presented in a fantastic video done by Tom Scott, the world's oldest hotel, the Nishiyama Onsen Keiunkan, is now an LLC helmed by someone not part of the family that owns it, as no member of the family currently can or has the understanding of how to run it, nor desires to, and thus they entrusted it to their senior-most employee. Had Yukiko's story generally been about how she had come to hate and wanted nothing to do with her family's business? There were and are ways to address that to show it wasn't about forcing conformity. We have another story like that late in Persona 5 people like to take out of context as well. But that's just the one I fell aground of and didn't see the full breadth of at the time I was reviewing it, and I apologize for my addition to the discourse. That can happen, and that is on me, but I wasn't hating on the game for it, merely saying there could have been better ways to address that storyline to make it seem like Yukiko had more options and made an informed choice. That ain't true for the hate-dom. The two most vocally complained about, however, are Kanji Tatsumi and Naoto Shirogane, both because of matters regarding perception of LGBT issues, when they weren't originally. Some vitriolic audiences insisting Kanji has to be gay, and Naoto has to be transgender to like and be good at the things they are, when the game doesn't present them as such at all, and the game says they're not, which toxic players assume is just the game's makers being homo and transphobic, and forcing them to conform to gender stereotypes, when they're not. And that was the point. They don't conform, nor should they need to. And those idiots' assumptions actually is grounded in stereotyping, and the very consensus conformity they slandered the game for. Kanji's is the easier to explain of the two, in that Kanji is into things that are traditionally considered to be girly. He likes sewing and making stuffed animals, a trait gained by growing up around his mom, who runs a shop based around cloth and other textiles. However, sewing in Japan, thanks to in part due to heavy Western cultural indoctrination in the 1940s, is considered an extremely feminine skill and trait to bear, with most men that know how to sew, and do it well, being considered to be gay thanks to those Western cultural stereotypes. Despite sewing being an essential life skill an independent person should know, and many traditional crafts exercise the skill in professions without gender bias. The lie the game is then calling out is Kanji does not have to be gay, bi, or a feminine-presenting male to be good at and like doing those things. But his self-image was so under attack by assholes invoking sexist societal perceptions, he felt he needed to overcompensate, which he discarded as he became comfortable with himself, which was the arc confronting his shadow put him on. Toxic fans that assumed that the game straight-washed him, when his story wasn't about his sexuality from the start, but about Kanji having and embracing talents that do not conform to and defy gender stereotypes. Yet fans who want him to be gay in order to embrace them are instead forcing such upon him. And Naoto ends up being treated the same way due to her desire to be a detective and follow in her family's legacy as investigators, despite the extreme sexism that is present in Japan's criminal justice system towards any female law enforcement or investigative agents, or even lawyers and judges in their system. As a result, Persona 4 depicted Naoto as someone who presented herself as being male, not just because all her idolized influences were men, but in order to avoid the biases of that very same system and make it a non-issue with respect to her involvement in investigations. For as is historically grounded, a woman investigator's deductions and evidence would not be taken seriously over that of such being presented by a man. That is so precedent that multiple crime drama series have presented that as their entire premise. And yes, that fact is also relevant to Persona 5 in explaining two of its character storylines. As we're discussing Naoto and the trans discourse that has popped up around her, I'm actually going to hand it off to someone who is more involved in transgender issues than myself. For those of you who are new around here or don't watch our streams, this is my roommate Alexis.
Oh, hi!
And she is trans. And she has played Persona 4 to be informed about Naoto's story, so I'm going to let her speak about it instead.
Naruto's story was about how psychologically harmful that it can be to hide the very foundational traits of who you are when part of a profession that is not gender equal how much that is bullshit and her gaining the resolve to not deny her birth gender just to conform to society's expectations of what an investigator and detective should be. She is defying cultural and career stereotypes regarding gender by doing this, even if she herself does bear masculine traits like to dress in male fit clothing as a style preference and adores Persona's in-series Super Sentai team, while she herself is named after two characters from Super Sentai. Those are all positive things that show her as gender nonconforming, despite becoming more open and accepting with presenting the truth of her femininity. And yet, there is a vocal minority that thinks that Naoto must be trans male to be all of that. For those who think that, do you not realize how transphobic and sexist that declaration actually is? That Naoto has to be a man to be a detective? Really? Do you not get that this very same idea is what the game is explicitly in the literal text of it is pushing back against and calling out? That it's really a bad thing to force binary gender conformity on those who don't, as gender identity is a broader spectrum than just male, female, and a solid transition between the two. And it's worse on those who do it for the reason of wanting Kanji to be gay and Naoto to be trans male for the sole purpose of shaping them specifically that way, as Persona has a ridiculously large amount of toxic fans that are crack shippers with those specific kinks. But what's wrong with shipping them as they are? That isn't to say there isn't a transcoded message in Naoto's social link in the game, as the majority of it is based around being afraid that people will not accept you as you are, and finding out it is okay to be yourself and not hide who you are. That is something actual trans individuals go through, as well as gay and bisexual individuals as well, or people like Kanji with a non-gender conforming skill. But while it hits those same notes, her being accepting of her birth gender isn't transphobic and forcing conformity. As if it was, she'd stop being a detective due to the Japanese criminal justice system not being accepting of women, as opposed to moving forward and just not hiding her gender. But a transcoded message, one that is positively received by transgender individuals, does not require the character actually be transgender to be well received. It'd be good to have more positive transgender representation, but a story arc that epitomizes the struggle of a trans individual can be just as good. What's missed in both Kanji's and Naoto's tales by those saying this about them is they are explicitly pushing back against institutional traditionalist sexism and forced gender roles. You know, that thing that is the root cause of both homo and transphobia in the first place? So to say the game is all about forcing the cast to conform to societal expectations, ignoring their true selves, is to show you either didn't play the game, didn't pay attention to it, or are deliberately lying. Not everything has subtext. There are times when people say exactly what they intend. All good?
Yes, thank you for joining me in on this.
My pleasure. Woo!
And all of this is unfortunately relevant to Persona 5, as these same sorts of culturally tone-deaf assumptions and accusations at the game just kept coming along, stealing attention away from the actual narrative direction and focus about the plot. To the point the toxic fans somehow made a canonically very horrible character score very highly in the series' popularity polls by deliberately ignoring the reality of the harm of their actions, or the fact they were centrally responsible for them, while proceeding to hate on and tear down those that have some of the best plotted arc content in the game. Persona 5 has become simultaneously an overhyped and underpraised game as a consequence of all this. Everything it genuinely does right not being acknowledged by the hatedom that didn't pay attention or ignored the cultural context, while its few failings are either subsequently ignored or overblown to the point of ridiculousness. And this is legitimately frustrating, as these toxic fans with their proclamations ignore the literal text of the story to make shit up about it, when the literal intended text of the content proves them wrong. Like, are there that many people who fail basic reading and story comprehension? Now, for the sake of fairness, I'm not always perfect on this myself, and sometimes I can come away with the wrong take. But even with the Yukiko thing, that was rooted from having a different perspective on her options that her social link didn't seem that interested in letting her explore. I wasn't calling her the person who ruins the plot for it, as she doesn't have such critical prominence herself to be the deciding factor for such. And yet, that's what some of these idiots do, because they place their blame on the shoulders of the wrong individuals, when they were not a critical individual responsible for carrying the plot to begin with. Which I think is one of the bigger issues with Persona 5's discourse specifically, and that discussion around it rarely ever gets right which characters of the plot are load-bearing, and yet end up not carrying their weight as the storytellers deliberately try and shift it off of them when they shouldn't. And that's assuming the fandom isn't just being arbitrarily awful, as happened to some people who hate on the characters introduced in Royal despite their integration into the story being so well handled that outside of one incident that was done just to confirm for players that, no, they weren't just playing the original game again, they blend in with everyone else so as to not make them anywhere near as intrusive as Marie was made in Persona 4 Golden, which itself generated many players' distaste for her due to the legitimate special framing of her, which was in no way helped by Persona 4 Golden the animation. Legitimately, if you did not play the original release of Persona 5, there is no major difference to their story inclusion and eluded relevance, since the same thing that is done with her is also done with cast members Makoto, Futaba, and Haru, if one is paying attention to see them pop up far earlier to their relevance in the exact same ways. So no, new cast member Yoshizawa is not being turned into the special with the way her edition was written. She just has her own plot arc that's seeded earlier and not sequestered into her own story month like everyone else is, and has her own characterization quirks. Really, the problem all game long is certain characters being able to get away with being awful to others in the ensemble, while they themselves receive no retaliation or consequence for their own improper or even abusive actions. A bad writing trope the franchise retained in 5 that was already poorly handled in 3 and 4 with their own respective whipping boys. Though if I am being absolutely fair, both the game's English dub and localization did not help matters, as the game's translation is not good, there being an excess of unnecessary localization changes in the dialogue that were not present in the translations of the previous games, or at least to the same degree, where the changes in Persona 5 actually obfuscate and at times entirely misrepresent the intent of the storyline, it reaching the point many plot-critical conversations are entirely different, not just in phrasing, but in meaning in the English release than their intended ones in Japanese, which were not fixed for the Royal re-release, many of which I only caught because I used the Japanese dialogue track because they are that divergent. It's not entirely a case of they didn't care gag localizing the game, but there's multiple times throughout the story where the localization does not follow either the letter nor the spirit of the work, and made the purpose of what was conveyed be far less clear than they should due to their deliberate and completely unnecessary localization changes. Again, the emphasis being placed on unnecessary, as there would have been no difficulty in more directly translating the things they did change, but they made a deliberate choice to rewrite it or include dialogue that doesn't exist or need to be there from the start. As is my position with localization, if you are maintaining the spirit of what was intended despite the difference in phrasing, some may debate the accuracy of the changes, but it's not going to create the same grievances as when one completely rewrites the dialogue without regard for what was actually said. An example, there is a conversation which is supposed to be about one character named Ryuji, in good fun, teasing another of the cast named Makoto about how their persona manifested. That is instead changed to a meaningless reference to the John Bon Jovi song, Wanted, Dead or Alive, with the characters then quoting the song in this segment. What point does this have?
Nothing.
The joke that was replaced was one character always wanted to drive a stolen bike, and the one they were teasing responded that hers was not stolen, as her persona manifests as a motorcycle initially. That's character-based. That's relevant banter. That tells you something about the nature of those involved and how they interact as goofball and straight woman, even if it's just fluff dialogue. And there is no reason to have changed that, as it is completely explicable within the framework of what the story was doing, and isn't something that would confuse people without the cultural context. Instead, the altered version is more likely to confuse people than the original was, because not everyone is going to get the music reference the localization needlessly shoved in. So without context to that music reference, the replacement dialogue is entirely nonsensical. And beyond that, has stolen from the player's perspective about those they are engaging with inside the game, which obfuscated their depiction instead of informing it. While the example I just cited is a minor case of such, those sorts of alterations are all over the game. Add up when not carefully handled, is a contributing reason, though not the entire cause, for why people can get the wrong idea about what the story meant due to them changing the literal text and intent, and makes those who are paying attention in good faith towards the material more struggle to grasp the story's meaning, which subsequently leads to a much larger toxic fandom for those who didn't bother to pay attention and look for differences. Yet we should not have to do work to be able to understand our entertainment passively. As how are we supposed to know what was intended by which to judge the material fairly if the translation given to us in the localization process has entirely, needlessly, unnecessarily changed in bad faith what would then lead us to the proper conclusions the writer was intending and directing us towards? We should not need to learn Japanese or deep dive into transcript differences to get what was actually meant. That is what the localization process is supposed to provide up front. This is why me talking about the nonsense towards Persona 3 and 4 needed to be done before we move forward, as those controversies were facilitated by individuals misrepresenting and not understanding the literal text and intent when such were not egregiously overridden from the start, and thus those making something out of nothing were themselves creating a bad faith argument, one that anyone who played the game could refute by just posting screenshots. Whereas a lot of Persona 5's bad takes were instead facilitated by this deliberate obfuscation and alteration of the details by the localization team, as the evidence that would refute the argument has itself been tainted, though this again not helped by some Japanese exclusive material that was likewise taken out of context, again thanks to bad translation. And actions like this have done tangible harm, not just to a work's representation, but to individuals, to the point of staff, creators, and companies getting death threats. This is not Atlas or Persona fandom specific, but Japanese companies have been taking fandom extremism more seriously ever since the attack on Kyoto Animation in 2019 killed 36 people. So for those who say that they have a right to ignore authorial intent and change dialogue to whatever they want regardless of whether it reflects what was originally written, yeah, no, you are doing no one a favor at this point and risking real people's well-being, as you're helping create these toxic lunatics that harass and threaten fans, creators, and cast members. Knock it off. Your replacement jokes aren't worth it, and you should know better than to alter the underlying work you weren't the creator of. If you want to change the details of what actually happened in a story not your own, then just go write fucking fanfiction like everyone else and stop making more work and stress for us that just want to enjoy something that interests us. As for the English cast, well, their performances were mixed at best with regards to what was needed for the roles. This is not a slight against the English actors, mind you. Xander Mobius lives on as part of the meme of Terrence Darby from JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. I have not engaged with much else he has been cast in, but I have not heard any bad words about his other work. Cassandra Lee Morris was chilling in her portrayal as Yu-Gi-Oh! GX's Yubel, despite 4Kids mistreating her season, and her role of Buddy Cat Kyubey from Madoka Magica was fantastically sinister. Max Middleman did great playing the redubbed voice of Kira Yamato in the Gundam Seed HD remaster cut, and it's not his fault that he mispronounced almost every name in that series, as that was down to the ADR director screwing that up for every actor across the entire Seed remaster dub, alongside it having the same problems Persona 5 did, and it having an excessive amount of unnecessary localization in comparison to the original Bandai Ocean dub of the Seed series. Erika Harlacher is underrated for her roles as Togo Minmori in Yuki Yunezahiro and Kurapika in Hunter x Hunter. Matthew Mercer has so many fantastic roles, it's hard to pin down one, on top of him being the architect of the web series phenomena that is Critical Role. Chirami Lei is going to eternally be Uiharu Kazari from the Raildex series for me, on top of her more recognized roles as Lucy Hartfilia in Fairy Tail, or Kudelia Ina Bernstein in Gundam Iron-Blooded Orphans. Erica Lindbeck's performance of Luna made her my favorite character in the web series Hell of a Boss. Xanth Hoon's Yuki Yuna helped make that English dub memorable. Robbie Damon has a unique cadence with his voice that draws one to his performances, both as an underdog and an antagonist. Best epitomized by his role as Moomin Rider in One Punch Man, Mamoru Chiba in the Sailor Moon redubs, and The Curious Cat of Ruby Volume 9. Laura Post was absolutely perfect as Ragyo Kiryuin in Kill la Kill, and Queen Nehelenia in Sailor Moon. And I dare not speak one bad word towards the late Billy Kametz, who passed away in June of 2022. Best known as Josuke Higashikata in JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Diamond is Unbreakable, Galo Thymos in Promare, Naofumi Iwatani in Rising of the Shield Hero, and Hiroto Kuga of Gundam Build Divers Re-Rise. So no, despite the localization team dropping the ball twice over, as they did not correct any of the localization screw-ups in the Royal re-release, I'm not deliberately hating on the English cast or dubbing in general by reviewing the game with the Japanese audio track. But the reason why I am is most of the main cast of the game were written with the Japanese actors in mind to a more severe degree than is usually the case, with intent to invoke specific, complementary actor allusions to prior roles of theirs that directly inform the story and the characterization of those they portray. And most of these Japanese actors have been co-stars in prior productions, many of which I have talked about before, to give them far better chemistry. All of which accents and amplifies Persona 5's thematic narrative and the parallels to these other series that these actors bear. To the point, there were deliberate jokes peppered into the original scripts and characterization. Case in point, Haruka Tamatsu playing characters with a sadistic streak, whose primary weapon is a giant axe, and their special powers tied to attacking people psychically, alongside bearing an association with guns, and their progenitors being literal space cases. Yeah, the entire Persona 5 storyline thus far is like this for the Japanese cast in both big and small ways. And this is not reflected within the English cast for the game. They do not evoke these same parallels, and it is not the English cast's fault, so it would be wrong to blame them for it. But this, I feel, is one of those rare situations where the Japanese casting was so perfect and the writing for them done to deliberately fit these actors that it would have been impossible for any English dub cast, short of just straight up calling back together the same English cast for Persona 4, Dot Hack, and Code Geass, which frankly would not have been a good thing, to properly fill the same roles. I love hearing those actors, but to constantly rely on the same group of names discourages involving new talent in big projects. Even though Atlus went with established big-name VAs on the Japanese side specifically to make this all a big game generation-defining multimedia event. But it is a fact that you get an entirely different experience than what was meant with the English dub, and made worse by the directing of the English cast being, frankly, bad. Them not conveying the right mood or tone or even the emotion that the game is going for at key moments. So there are numerous times where it feels as if the actors were entirely miscast for the role by how far off the mark they can be. Max Mittelman's performance as Ryuji, Shirami Lei's Makoto, and Erica Lindbeck's Futaba commonly hit an entirely divergent note on their portrayals that would undermine those characters' depiction, which only worked to further trigger fandom toxicity towards their characters, which they are undeserving of. Hell, of the English cast, Cassandra Morris and Robbie Damon are really the only ones that get points for that subversive remix of a prior role, playing into and accenting their portrayal, and do more to work with the character they were given. When for the rest, it is more of a mixed bag. To reiterate, this is not the fault of the English cast that they don't hit these same beats as the Japanese cast, but these things that broaden perspective of the game make it a better experience for me to play with the Japanese audio enabled, as I end up not getting that from the English dub. And I'm someone that prefers English dubs where possible that feels this game and its sequels are a worse experience for their localization, as the end product feels like a half-assed job. Not because of the actors, but due to every other step in the process. And that all really starts with our protagonist for the game, the Phantom Thief of Hearts Joker, whose canon name is either Ren Amamiya if you follow the utterly awful A1 Pictures anime, or Akira Kurusu if you follow the manga. Yeah, I went with Ren for this, as every time I hear the name Akira, my mind immediately goes to that scene in the movie Akira, where a character shouts, Akira! And that really gets annoying to keep having that play in my head. Though there was an alternate name I tried to give my Joker, and ended up thwarted by the text character limits, as in Japanese, the character is played by Jun Fukuyama, and Persona 5 deliberately invokes leitmotifs of Code Geass throughout its story with the members of its cast, though in the cast members' case, each end up amalgamated with other source characters. But Fukuyama's performances as Joker when he's actually allowed to have dialogue is as good as it is because he is deliberately and directly calling back to his previous personification of Lelouch v. Britannia in that Sunrise anime that began this year's set of reviews from me, and a large reason to why I performed that. Though my use of the word leitmotif might be off to some, as it's a term that more describes music than story themes, such being a recurrent theme throughout a composition associated with a particular person, idea, or situation, such as John Williams' Imperial March always calling up imagery of Darth Vader and the rest of Star Wars' Empire. Persona 5, with its Code Geass parallels, I felt fit that definition, only substitute music composition with narrative and character composition. We actually start the game in media res of Ren's alter ego, the Phantom Thief Joker, Phantom Thieves being the Japanese equivalent to a gentleman thief, and that name itself inspired by a character in Japanese pop culture, known as the Phantom Thief Joker as well, performing a heist. The story set up in a big casino we have to fight our way out of, which is infested by the shadows of humanity and the demons born of them, acting as the game's tutorial stage to the complete ability set we will be gaining for Joker as time goes on. As he sneaks his way out, Joker's allies warn him they've been betrayed, his escape assisted by another relevant character in the game, who is not a regular member of his team in the royal version, before he is summarily captured on the outskirts of this palace of depravity by members of Tokyo's Metropolitan Police Department, who summarily attempt to beat a confession out of him and eventually forcing Ren to sign a pre-written statement that will make him culpable for a litany of crimes, lest they just kill him and cover it up by saying he committed suicide in custody, so as to close all loose ends and cover up the criminal conspiracies Ren's actions had in fact been exposing.
無事に出られるなんて思うなよ。嫌ってほど分からせてやる。やったことには責任がつきまとうってことをな。
Yeah, about that. Persona 5 as a game is one that is set in 2016, and is a narrative that at the heart of it is about government corruption, conspiracies to remove the will of self-governance, and the distortions of ideologies and ambition which harm the people, with the Joker of the deck beginning his journey as Zero, and fermenting a rebellion all born out of seeking to undo the sins of an unjust society, by striking at the elements of it that crushed the innocent underfoot, and changing their hearts in the process. Thus, Jun Fukuyama leading this cast and picking up the Mask of Revolution, again, was a perfect decision. Or at least it would have been, had they not kept Atlus's tradition of having the main playable character be mute outside of battle. Mass Effect and Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic are examples of Persona's dialogue options being able to have the viewpoint character voice the chosen lines, and there are multiple circumstances in this game where other characters' dialogue directly comes off as something the protagonist himself should have voiced, but were instead given to someone else deliberately so they wouldn't have to pay him for a line. But if you're going to cast an actor for such a starring role, why not just let them act? There are multiple games that do that. There's no reason why Persona still has to have the protagonist be mute in the game, as I'm not watching the garbage that was A1 Pictures' god-awful adaptation of this game to actually hear him playing the role. And to discuss that briefly, Persona 5 the Animation's problem is the same of many of A1 Pictures' anime. It does not know what to focus on as part of the adaptation, nor where to spend its budget, resulting in so very many of its most essential moments having been done horribly or with minimalist animation as the bulk was spent on the absolutely superfluous. Its battles are literally all flash and no substance, while in the civilian segments it pays the most attention on animating the moments and events which least matter to progressing the characters, while more essential ones to progressing the story are stripped bare, and done in ways that actively make it more difficult to tell the story or connect to the cast as people instead of as story devices. If someone only watched Persona 5 the animation to get a feel for the full Persona 5 experience, you would not even get half the intended story and characterization, which I felt more severely compounds the error regarding the fandom's appreciation for the story than the dub localization did. While I might have wanted to see Ren and Makoto go on an arcade date, that isn't a replacement for having their character arcs done properly, or the anime spending several full minutes showcasing Haru looking at teacups for the cafe she wants to open years down the line after she gets a business degree. But by proxy shows more detailed animation in that scene, while skimping out on showing the attacks of Alice done properly in one of the series' most pivotal battles. Alice, for those who don't know, is an endgame persona who has as its signature attack the capability to summon either facets of the book Alice in Wonderland, or just an army of teddy bears to kill enemies en masse. Yet when A1 Pictures used her, it's just a burst of colored light, the same as they did for the attacks of all the other Persona. It's basically the same with the grand majority of A1's productions that make them awful. Their content lacks the substance the original works or other adaptations may have featured, as their animations are just too focused on the wrong things. A1 Pictures continues to get away with this crap not because they're successful, by the way, but because they're a division of Aniplex, which is owned by Sony. And because Sony is footing the bills, that's why they've not felt the financial losses of how frequently their works are rated as bad. And not helped by how, even if you might like the franchise they do, you can't even afford to buy them with how price gouged the sets are. That should be making their financial situation far more dire by locking off most people from even considering purchase of their shows via mass retail. I am not paying $300 to $400 fucking dollars for Persona 5's garbage adaptation when the video game originally retailed for $60 and has a longer, more engaging experience. Hell, I bought both special editions for $5 and Royal. The bonuses in those sets validated the price points, and I still didn't even spend half of what the anime is sold for. Like, how are you supposed to make money from millions of people if you price them out of being able to afford the work? You don't! And while you might see me use a few clips from P5A as accent pieces later on where I feel the game didn't provide me enough material to emphasize my point, I'm explicitly saying that anyone remotely interested in this game should avoid that adaptation like the plague. Hell, you can collect the manga adaptation of Persona 5 for less, and it adapts the story better too! Anyways, the game starts us near the end of the journey with Ren's capture after many of the tales have already been told. Ren is about to die, and the only thing holding off his execution is the presence of the prosecutor that has been assigned to the case of the Phantom Thieves, Sai Nijima. And Sai has been part of this case more than even she has been led to believe. So more than anything, she needs answers to how Ren has done the things he has, if only for her own peace of mind. Which is only hampered by the fact the other government agents that have been assaulting Ren have drugged him, and Sai is on a time limit for how long she has before those behind the conspiracy will call her bluff and drag her out. Ren getting the clarity he needs to push forward, thanks to the power of the mighty monarch!
This cocoon has witnessed your sins, and she seeks vengeance. The cocoon will punish the wicked. The cocoon will reward the righteous. You must escape from her grasp. You must earn your freedom.
Which sets up the framing device for the majority of the game. Persona 5 has most of its story structured as one massive flashback arc, with each chapter of the game being framed by the story flashing forward to Ren and Sai in this makeshift interrogation room. Ren having been injected with an overdose's amount of drugs that's muddied his thoughts but also made him highly suggestive, allowing him to relate every single thing that's happened. Also, Sai can make up her mind. For while she herself is not a member of the grand conspiracy the game's story is focused around, her bosses are, and she has been as much used by them to do their dirty work as those minions lower in the chain. And I don't like the framing device with this interrogation, or at least how it was used. I find it frequently acts to be intrusive to actually telling the story. Every time we cut back to Sai, it ends up spoiling some major aspect of the story we're just about to experience. and in doing so ruins the immersion to actually experience it play out. There is an importance and reason for it to be here, but I was more invested in what was currently going on in the moments when we'd be pulled back to the interrogation room. Like, how much time is even passing in that room? What specifically is Ren relating?
We're on a mission from God.
Considering Atlas's policies around spoiling game content, it makes these flash-forward sequences that spoil what you're about to do extremely hypocritical as well, on top of breaking the immersion. And worse with regards to the idiots in the player base, the framing device made them read the story as the protagonist being an actual guilty man, and were playing as the villain which they raged against. Because obviously those running the government couldn't possibly be corrupt, right? Even though the game is literally about fighting a corrupt political conspiracy. You see how that all wrapped around? And as such, we are, for the most part, as I will be using a few snippets here and there, just skipping use of the framing device in this review, only addressing what eventually comes from it near the end, as that's the only point where it becomes relevant. So, to take a third shot at starting all of this...
さあ、話しなさい。すべてを、ね。
The story really begins in the late end of 2015, when while he was traveling home, Ren stopped a man from sexually assaulting a woman, only for that man's position in the government to allow him to press charges against Ren instead, the man claiming that Ren assaulted him instead of the reverse, and it was his actions against the woman that started everything. Plot point. Major plot point. We will be coming back to discuss this far later down the line. Ren was canonically 16 at the time, but close enough to his 17th birthday that the frame job this man made would have led to Ren being charged as an adult, at least had the case gone to trial. And man, oh man, did this man not want it to go to trial. As then he'd be on record as being there and he'd have to testify or make a sworn statement to get the false charge against Ren to stick. And while the woman involved in this disappeared out of fear of the man involved, so Ren wouldn't have even had a witness to back up his side of this stormy story, a paper trail of this man's activities would have undermined his own plans. And he couldn't have that. So even his ruining of another's life would need to be covered up. Of course, he'd do it through his lawyer. Consequently, the lawyer hired on Ren's behalf, which did not represent him or his interests, got him a plea deal that prevented him from having his day in court, and circumventing the system entirely, making it so he was falsely charged and by default convicted for a crime he did not commit, all because he stopped to help someone. That is the world we've immediately walked into, and how much it has been made to go wrong, all because of the malice of one man and those who support him. But after being charged, Ren's parents wanted nothing to do with him, nor would his school keep him. The court required him enroll at Shujin Academy in Tokyo, which was also the assailant's doing, and be taken in by Sojiro Sakura, owner and operator of Cafe LeBlanc. Heh, cute. Who, on top of looking like a retired version of Daisuke Jigen from Lupin III, has enough governmental connections from his previous career to double as Ren's parole officer, even if Ren's bunk for the next year ends up being the storeroom above the cafe, if only because Sojiro can't let Ren in his house, for reasons we will discuss later that has nothing to do with what Ren was charged with. Sojiro is a hard-ass, but a well-meaning one. And, well, he's just met Ren, having no personal or professional connections to the protagonist, which is unlike any of the previous Persona games. The fact he's giving him a chance says a lot in and of itself, and he knows the real story behind Ren's situation, not just the falsified plea deal. Though as he settles in, Ren notices on his phone a mysterious app, one that has installed itself on his phone earlier, and it will just not go away. Damn malware, it'll install itself on anything these days. That app, however, is part of Ren's connection to the Velvet Room, him only now being summoned to the place that this time is expressed as a prison of reformation, with his warden being these very creepy one-eyed twins.
Come and play with us. Forever and ever.
ようこそ私のベルベットルームへ。
Oh, yeah, another thing that's gotta be addressed, as Igor's performance here is vastly different than any before him. This is because between the production of Persona 4 and 5, the Japanese actor for Igor, Isamu Tanonaka, passed away. He was summarily replaced by Masane Tsukayama, who gave us a much deeper voice to the character, changing from a kind, goofy-voiced benefactor to one running his own agenda that is benefited by supporting the wildcard arcana in their development, which was then reflected in the English dub subsequent recast. And when you remember Igor was a creation of Philemon's for the specific purpose of growing wildcards into the worlds in his game with other deities, it makes a great deal of sense coming in that not every Igor encounter is going to be as upbeat as it's been with the prior protagonists. This Igor is not beating around the bush in wanting something from Ren. It's just to Ren's own advantage to accept the contract, and if he does well, he can possibly save the world from destruction. The twins are in turn Igor's assistants this time around, Justine and Carolyn, who upon seeing Ren's rebellious and noble nature due to his actions before, have sought him out to assist him in their own way with his rehabilitation. So here's something players might have missed with the twins calling Ren inmates in the English dub of the game, as in Japanese the equivalent word shujin is the same as the name of the academy Ren has been enrolled in. This is because the two are homophones, words that sound the same but have different meanings. The name of the academy written with the characters that translate as excellence or mastery, while the kanji for inmate are different but have the same pronunciation of shujin when spoken out loud. The shared word was a deliberate pun, done that way as if to say, no matter what the formal word about the place is, that school too is a prison incarcerating those banished there. This was confirmed to be an intentional choice in an interview with the series director Katsura Hashino, with Persona 5's head writer Shinji Yamamoto being behind the wordplay, as the pursuit of ambition at the cost of morality just as much imprisons you to the machinations of an unjust system. That is one of the themes of the game, and thus makes it all the more meaningful to learn that those that run the school are part of the conspiracy.
You weren't telling them about the secret government conspiracy, were you?
Well, my wallet was missing.
Now, folks, listen, pay no attention to this guy. Everything is exactly as it seems.
This is made more clear down the line, as the next day Sojiro gets Ren enrolled formally at the academy, the egg-shaped principal ready to throw Ren out on principle, which, considering some future knowledge I have, was very likely the plan. After all, who would believe the word of someone with a criminal record over a more upstanding citizen? It only reinforced the idea he was a deviant to begin with, and following the cultural stereotyping present in Japanese society, unfit to be among them. As from there, the problem Ren's assailant created would solve itself by Ren having no choice but to turn to a life of crime in order to survive, thanks to Japanese societal stigmas, and they'd never believe his original story. But this scene also introduces Ren's homeroom teacher Sadayo Kawakami, who will become relevant later, but in the now is just very, very tired. As well for the protection of the student, the state of Ren's record should stay completely confidential beyond those who would need to know, such as the principal himself and Ren's homeroom teacher. That should be the limit of how far that spreads among the staff unless disciplinary action would need to be taken. However, due to Kawakami's exhaustion, she breaks that confidentiality, as she vents about it to the most absolute wrong person, the gym teacher Suguru Kamoshida, as the man projects an air about him that just makes people trust him and do what he says. Or else. Primarily because he's brought fame to the school through being a former Olympic medalist who has trained their volleyball team well. And from their view, that's put in the principal's head that turning a person with a record into an upstanding citizen would only further raise their cultural standing, especially in a time where it seems like the entire country is derailing from its tracks. Case in point. Yeah, this is part of the conspiracy storyline of the game. Someone is causing a phenomena that has been called mental shutdowns. Moments where people become entirely brain dead either for short periods or permanently. Well, okay, I should clarify this point. There are actually two phenomena, but the localization team at times would translate them as being the same one, using the umbrella term of mental shutdown for both of them, as in both types the conscious mind of the affected individual is thrown out of the driver's seat. The second type are psychotic breakdowns, and they occur when someone goes into a mad rage and do things they normally wouldn't. And keep that in mind for later, as it is very relevant for the progression of the main plot of the story. Mental shutdowns, on the other hand, are, as the name says in the tin, when someone's brain stops working for no perceivable reason, paused so they either do not perceive time at key moments, or are rendered outright brain dead, with their body left catatonic or immediately following into death. Both bear the same visual symptom of a character's eyes rolling up into their head, only differentiated by whether they interact with the environment around them or not. These incidents have been instigated to largely affect government agencies, exasperating any perceived slight and magnifying them into larger catastrophes. One that would have not happened on their own, but any more nefarious means or motive are obfuscated by investigators part of the conspiracy, blaming the matter on the minor issue the incidents expose, so as to show those operating those divisions as incompetent, bleeding from them political support and capital. And an election year of all times at that. Who could possibly have such a motive to deliberately engineer such a scandal harming their political opponents? Again, this is a game set in 2016. But yeah, this is the context for how Sai got involved. She is the lead prosecutor assigned to the mental shutdown case and is playing part in the investigation towards them, on top of her other assignments as a prosecutor, and is being pressured to find a culprit due to the sheer number of them that have occurred over the last 2 to 3 years. Well, okay, I should clarify. Some foundational events for the conspiracy occur in 2013, but most of the conspiracy's activities start in 2014. It's just thanks to certain events in the game, it actually makes more sense if the conspiracy was active earlier than the game later says they are, simply due to matters of interconnectivity. I will state what later on. I actually had to revise certain parts of this script when I realized there was a timeline conflict I had unintentionally presented. But to me, due to the bigger enemies in this all being connected to the conspiracy, well, it would have made more sense for all events to have started 3 years back to build a bigger, better, grander picture of the whole storyline. In the future scenes of the interrogation, all of the mental shutdown incidents that have been caused by the conspiracy have been blamed on Ren as their scapegoat, leaving them all free to do as they wish, and Sai was attempting to determine the means by which they were done, as Sai is the kind of person that needs all the facts before her in order to determine her course of action, one that is complemented by the tasks of the successor to the Detective Prince title the game introduces. That title claimed by this amicable guy named Goro Akechi. And thus, an hour into the game, every accusation a player might falsely levy against Ren regarding his criminality that the game introduces him under is proven demonstrably false, as the crimes he got blamed for predate anything he's done. And I have seen people avoid the game because they didn't want to play as a criminal confessing to their sins. There are some very stupid people out there. But enough about them. Ren's got to get to school the next day. The subway derailing is causing enough travel delays that the already crowded Tokyo subway network is even worse off, leading to Ren crossing paths with fellow students An Takamaki and Ryuji Sakamoto, voiced by Nana Mizuki and Mamoru Miyano respectively, Ryuji appearing right after An accepts a ride to school from the aforementioned Suguru Kamoshida, which Ryuji was too late to intercede on, due to him having a grudge with the teacher.
変態教師好き放題しやがってお城の王様かよそう思わねえか
This is where things go weird. as the images of people we see on the street begin to loop, and instead of the school, the location has been replaced in its entirety by a castle, matching the words Ryuji spoke about Kamoshida, as if this place had been mapped onto reality itself. Knowing not what to do, the pair enter, and amidst seeing reality distortions that show this castle has somehow mapped itself over top of the school, they are immediately accosted by guards, captured, and thrown into this castle's dungeons. It is here we're met by this castle's ruler, a yellow-eyed King Kamoshida, that is later told to be Kamoshida's own shadow. Since it's been years, for those who may not remember, Persona as a franchise operates off of the idea that cognitive expressions of thoughts, emotions, and human ego can be manifested as their own entities. While they cannot normally, there are exceptions, exist in the normal human layer of reality, they can manifest their own shadow realm to live in, which is finally named in this game as the Metaverse, and they can have an effect upon it, as a collective of shadows can congregate and come to manifest themselves as representations of mythological spirits, demons, and deities, powers and all, with the capacity to affect the corporeal plane. Significantly strong shadows can resonate with their originating selves to then empower them, even creating their own lands and dungeons that distort the metaverse from being a mirrored, balanced reflection of the real world. And in doing so, it alters one's cognitive perception of what is real. For in the metaverse, perception literally makes reality. This is what we see occurring here. This King Kamoshida has become an empowered shadow, it not just representing all of Kamoshida's darkest desires, but the shadow itself has become so distorted that these desires are in fact feeding back onto Kamoshida, so he has not been acting as a balanced normal person, but hijacked by his shadow to give into his worst impulses and abandon any semblance of morality. This moral black hole has consequently crushed itself into a singularity that draws other weaker shadows into it, and shadows that become slave to a stronger one empower the dominant shadow, enabling it to manifest this castle, a palace, by which the dominant shadow can entrap and crush the lesser shadow's own wills. Kamoshida's palace having mapped itself over the metaverse's equivalent of where Shujin Academy is in reality. This in turn feeds back and manifests as permitting the living person, i.e. Kamoshida, to have greater psychological influence and sway over those that come into his orbits, those that enter the territory of the palace, becoming influenced by and trapped inside of it, as the shadow in the metaverse under normal circumstances stays in equivalent proximity to their human counterpart's real-life location. So if someone attends Shujin Academy in the real world, then in the metaverse their shadow has itself walked into where the palace has manifested, and as consequence can be openly swayed by it, creating a perception filter effect that prevents those in proximity to the palace ruler from realizing anything about their actions is bad, and thus are indoctrinated to go along with them. This is why Kawakami earlier so easily gave up Ren's confidential information to Kamoshida, as she can trust Kamoshida, right? At least, that's what her mind is telling her. That is what she is being made to perceive as true. And it's sinister, as with what this palace's power has granted its ruler, you don't even realize that anything is wrong, even when their misconduct is pointed out to you, as you won't believe it even when the evidence is staring at you in the face, due to its power turning everything around them into a cult of personality. I stretch for that pun there, but it is accurate. Moreover, this state of palace and ruler, this is not natural to the shadows, or at least, not normally. While they can form on their own, they don't grow this powerful in short spans of time, as the experience of the person likewise impacts their shadow. And all it really takes is any crisis of conscience, guilt, or a popping of an overinflated ego to collapse a naturally forming palace long before it reaches this point. Someone is deliberately causing shadows to become distorted enough to grow into palace rulers by them binging on a root sin by which to derive their power, which occurs after causing the person to suffer a psychotic breakdown that they then internalize into a distorted delusion instead of expressing it externally, which prevents the shadow of the person to be in the driver's seat and influence their true self. To contrast the two forms, think of a normal person just getting so angry they have to vent, and then venting in a violent way. Say punching something, a person or an object either works for this, or flipping a table. That being taken up to 11 is the normal psychotic breakdown Persona 5 presents. But the Palace Ruler's internalization that turns into a distorting delusion more looks like what one would see of, say, Batman's Rogues Gallery, which is a cavalcade of the mentally unwell, trapped by their own delusions they can't escape from. Them having that one moment, that one bad day, that makes them turn their blinders onto reality and try and take it all for themselves.
You brainwashed and kidnapped a woman who rejected you.
He was going to take her away from me. I had no choice.
You could have respected her wishes and left her alone.
I'd have killed her first!
So good we are getting anime Batman involved to put an end to it. Now, you won't see this perception filter effect mentioned much in discussion of Persona 5, or even on the franchise's wiki or TV tropes, at least at the time of this recording. Because while the major villains of this game are obviously manipulating cognition on a widespread basis as we near the end of the game, I don't think many notice the more passive effect I am describing, which we do keep seeing of every Palace Ruler in the game, which is what is ultimately pulling everyone's strings. As why would it only be the most powerful Palace Rulers that have this ability? Shouldn't all of them showcase it to varying extents? And the answer is, they do. But a lot of it can be written off or excused via other things. Except for one. Why did no one act to report the Palace Ruler to authorities before their grip became so cemented and normalized? The game has no good answer for that on its own, unless you factor this aspect of the distortion in, that the conscious ruler in the real world is being just as affected by it to normalize the malicious actions they commit. And the one triggering this and pulling the strings is one of the major three villains of the game. 4 if you count the end boss of Royal's content. But that's for later when we start working to stop other palaces from forming. In the moment, King Kamoshida's got Ren and Ryuji slated for execution for trespassing, Kamoshida taking great pleasure in beating Ryuji to death himself, as Ryuji has in the past defied and rebelled against the actions of the real Kamoshida's tyrannical abuse of the student populace. And seeing someone beaten on the ground like that, well, it wraps around to what Ren got in trouble for to begin with, as his morals scream at him that if someone is in need, you must help them. But he can't. If he does anything in the real world to act out, his life is over. And here, he doesn't even have that. All he can do is glare at them in defiance.
これは極めて理不尽なゲーム。勝機はほぼないに等しい。しかし、この声が届いているということは、まだ可能性は残っているはず。
我が身大事さに見殺しか。このままでは本当に死ぬぞ。それとも、あれは間違っていたのか。よかろう。か、聞き届けたり。
And once again, I must declare, in the moment of death, take the devil's power.
たとえ地獄につながれようと、すべてを己で見定め、強き意志の力を。
Let's start a revolution. As opposed to the previous game, the cast of Persona 5 manifest their persona when they resonate with a spark of rebellion, an absolute truth of their souls that brings them into communion with their shadow's power. But because rebellion is the key, all of them manifest new outfits within the metaverse to signify their defiance of a societal system that is being made to make the world go wrong, and them choosing to fight against it. Ren's being a mix of influences, the most obvious of them being the original Phantom Thief Arsène Lupin, mixed with stylistic elements of Lelouch v. Britannia's Zero Identity, because again, this character is played by Jun Fukuyama and draws immense influence from Lelouch. Ren's starting persona, Arsène, likewise reflects this reference, as a mythical thief and rebellious anti-hero that, while being a villain in some's eyes due to being opposite the law, his thievery was solely focused against those more nefarious and evil than himself, whom lawmakers routinely turned a blind eye to. Thematically, this is the perfect soul to incarnate as Ren's core persona, as a phantom or gentleman thief's entire purpose is to steal back what was wrongfully taken from the people and humiliate the corrupt in power to topple their enemies. Why else do you think the Lupin III franchise has lasted as long as it has? That itself is a timeless story engine. Arsène grants to Ren curse spells and a short dagger, which is used to defeat the shadows threatening us and trap King Kamoshida in his own jail cell. But the problem is a palace ruler is an extremely strong shadow who can control nearly every facet of their palace, so that's not going to hold him. And not even an awakened persona user is capable of toppling them on their own. So with Ren only having just manifested his for the first time, it's taking its psychological toll on him. And since they're in the metaverse where cognition is king, the psychological toll is draining his physical stamina fast. The pair try and find a way to escape the dungeon, this acting as a tutorial for the game's stealth mechanics, and honestly Persona 5's stealth mechanics are some of the best in any game I've ever played, as they actually implement, trying to be stealthy. Alas, there is no hiding in a box, a la the Metal Gear Solid series, the good ones at any rate. Though that type of sneaking grown from those games does seem to be a clear influence, as Persona 5 actively encourages you through every means it introduces to stay stealthy and sneak up on shadows slave to the palace rulers. Eventually we find our way forward blocked, which is where we come across the talking cat.
喋る猫。猫じゃねえ。次行ったら許さんぞ。
I'd say don't accept any contract it offers you, but it's a bit too late for that. This is Morgana, and they are not a shadow slave to the ruler, but another rebel against the machine. The problem Morgana has is his memory is on the fritz and thinks that he's a human transformed into a chibi Filaneko that would not look out of place in CyberConnect 2's Little Tail Bronx series. Now all we need is Morgana to pilot a steampunk robot or tank that uses souls for power. If you've not already, please play CyberConnect's Fuga Melodies of Steel games. After some banter with Ryuji, the pair do not get along and Morgana is frequently the antagonist of their exchanges, he offers to help them escape the palace. Morgana has his own persona based off of Zorro, the legendary swashbuckling outlaw of the southwestern United States back when the territory was owned by Mexico. And no, he is not voiced by Antonio Banderas, or for that matter, the companion of the Pirate King. As the more experienced persona user, Morgana can tell Ren's newly awakened, trying to brief him and Ryuji on the ropes, even as Ryuji's having difficulty processing all of this. Anyone would, really, after being thrust into effectively an alternate universe without warning. But Morgana is openly hostile towards Ryuji for it, and acts like an outright asshole. This unfortunately becomes a recurring thing throughout the game, as Ryuji is made to be Persona 5's respected butt monkey, acting as the counterpart of Junpei Iori from Persona 3 and Yosuke Hanamura from Persona 4 as the put-upon loser member of the cast who, no matter what they do, they cannot win, and are used for depreciating comedic effect. It is one of the things I actually most despise about this game, as Ryuji doesn't do anything to deserve the flack to the degree he gets it, especially in comparison to others among the cast who perform worse acts than himself, which are outright excused. I was already against Persona 4 doing this with Yosuke, but there was at least some back and forth there to excuse it, just not to the degree it always escalates, where any time Yosuke pushes back against the abuse he gets, it only causes worse things to happen. To see the same thing occur again, with Ryuji getting it worse for even smaller slights, when he is deliberately being insulted and antagonized by other cast members, while likewise being blamed for what others do, was not appealing, as it completely abandons ideas regarding how proportionate response to an act is supposed to occur. Junpei was the last time in the greater Shin Megami Tensei series where the equivalent role actually had proportionate response to any misconduct he may get involved in, and Junpei accepted his lumps and rolled with the punches when he deserved them. Yosuke's complaints were self-aware about how he didn't deserve how he was treated, and then back again with Ryuji, his own escalation is always rooted in how he does not deserve being treated like shit, and after everything he's already gone through, will not stand for such abuse. As a result, the most harm this does as consequence is towards Morgana's own character with how he deliberately showers Ryuji in abuse, in far excess to anything Ryuji does, especially when it comes to Ryuji not being a natural to the Phantom Thief thing, and not helped at all by the story deliberately using him trying to understand what's happened as an excuse by which to introduce dialogue asking questions the audience wants answered, which Ren cannot ask due to him being a silent protagonist. And since the story is using him that way, it makes it all the more indefensible for the story to then insult Ryuji for providing the means by which to then deliver to us, the unaware audience, essential, need-to-know information. It is the biggest writing crutch Persona 5 indulges in to treat the person asking a question in storyline, but on behalf of the audience, as an idiot. And nearly every time, I as a player ended up taking Ryuji's side on the matter over Morgana. For if Ren were allowed to talk, he would be asking many of the things Ryuji is made to. Anyone that isn't already read in on the theories of cognitive psychology would be asking these questions. And the fact that Ryuji is trying to understand these things better is a merit to him. But Morgana constantly treats him poorly for it because his off-the-cuff comments and explanations are constantly lacking until Ryuji asks for clarification. And when Morgana actually expands on and coherently explains himself properly after complaining that his audience is an idiot, then Ryuji immediately gets it. The frustration of this being every single person we recruit, bar one, requires this same expanded explanation that Ryuji asked for in the first place. Morgana's version is that much complete garbage that absolutely no one, again with that one exception, gets it when he explains it Morgana's way. So Morgana's ridicule of Ryuji all game long, and I do mean all game long, is consistently invalidated. But the game, and the fandom by proxy, never acknowledges it.
ここならシャドウも来ないだろう。なんでわかんだよ。ここだけ歪みが少ない。主の支配が弱い場所ってことだ。これ教室か？これでわかったろ？ここは主の心が映し出したもう一つの現実なのさ。
Like seriously, on top of playing Persona 4, I took psychology classes in college that got into these concepts to be read into this stuff. And yet, I agree with Ryuji's take that Morgana does an absolutely crap job at explaining them because Morgana every time makes the assumption that we know everything that he does, so he doesn't need to get into the details. But we don't know everything he does. And insulting Ryuji for it, but not the others, does nothing but make Morgana out to be a hypocritical asshole. But it's in a lot of this where I find my dislike of Max Middleman's performance as Ryuji in the English tracks, as, intentionally or no, his take on the character only seems to exasperate the Ryuji deserves to be a butt monkey problem to me in just how pathetic and whiny he makes Ryuji sound.
Send it back.
Sorry? I didn't get that.
Send the effing thing back!
Whereas Mamoru Miyano's performance more accents Ryuji's objections against being mistreated and exasperation at being denied essential, need-to-know information delivered in a simple, succinct way through which to make better decisions, due to the character's backstory of him being ostracized in excess of sin. So for the main story and character beats, and even the English take on the character to repeat the same compounding error, that is not appealing. I basically take his side all game long, because no one else will! Regardless, Morgana gets the two out, then returning to reality through the use of the app on Ren's phone that caused all this, allowing them to finally get to school in the real world, and for Ren to be in trouble for his tardiness. Fortunately, we have a built-in excuse of getting lost on one's first day, plus the railway delays alongside Ryuji being with us and getting us lost, provides enough cover for Ren to not get thrown out over it. Though this meeting also shows that the real Kamoshida, while he is a puppet to his shadow now, is not aware of everything his shadow is, only able to glean a distrust of Ren from his instincts. As for his antagonism of Ryuji, again they have history.
ほんと勘弁してほしいわ。なんで私がこんな目に。
Kawakami is not tolerant of Ren's tardiness, nor his companionship with Ryuji, as Kamoshida destroyed Ryuji's reputation the prior year to the point he is the school's pariah. And as it turns out, he's already done the same to Ren as well, Kamoshida having leaked the fact that Ren has a criminal record, but nothing about what he did to earn it, to immediately turn the school against him. Then he's also spread rumors that he's dating the previously seen An Takamaki, for the sole purpose of actually forcing her into a relationship with him. If it weren't for the influence of the palace, rumors like that would be grounds for investigation, but the psychological hold his shadow has over the school is permitting him to completely get away with it with impunity. To the point he can talk back to his boss and defame someone in public sight of everyone around him, and nothing will in any way be done about it. No, instead, they all write it off with excuses that try to validate his reprehensible behavior of how he's so upstanding, and he contributes so much to society, and he's making the school great again. Because the psychological effect the palaces play turn the rulers into cults of personality, so their sins, their guilt, can just be ignored.
Yeah.
Oh, right, another thing that put Persona 5 in my good graces. I brought her up before, but that girl is Haru Okumura, and she is relevant later on. Much later on. So much like her actress, keep smiling until we get to discussing her. But that's the thing I like. Unlike the previous games where you could only find characters once they are available for a social link or story event, or in Naoto's case when she comes to town, the cast members relevant to the story are present throughout the game. Haru does not become relevant for 6 game months, but if you stick around the school, you can on occasion catch sight of her and interactions she's having. And she's not the only example of this. I kind of came to hate the means of storytelling where a main or supporting character only comes to exist when the story suddenly decides to focus on them, which became so very commonplace in the 2010s that Persona 5 subverting such gets additional points from me. Anyways, Ryuji meets us on the roof, having heard the rumors as well, but puts little stock in them because of how he's also been ostracized by Kamoshida. More interested in what the hell the palace was, and if it might be a way to take down the man, as he's been abusing people left and right, yet none of them want to speak up, due to the prestige he brings from being a teacher here, and not wanting to slander him, as they subconsciously know what would happen to them if they would go against them. And thus, because no one will stand up, the abuse continues. But now, Ryuji sees this palace, as a means by which to subvert his power, get word of his crimes from the horse's mouth, and then validate them in real life by which to force him to be ousted by the weight of his sins being exposed. This is why I push back at Ryuji being the designated idiot. While there are flaws in the capacity to pull off this plan thanks to, well, how the metaverse itself works, the base logic of his plan is very solid. It's just he has no way to know of what will keep it from working. That night, after Ren gets an earful from Sojiro for the tardiness both to and from school...
Oh, どうした?
Plot point. We have a return to the Velvet Prison, where the denizens inform Ren, and the players, of the powers of the Persona for anyone who's not played a Persona game, as well as the Metaverse Navigator, the app that appeared on Ren's phone that's what lets humans freely enter the metaverse, which Igor can bestow upon those who he finds may be useful to Ren's rehabilitation. The next day, after we cross paths with another cast member, we find An being harassed by Kamoshida in order for him to fulfill those rumors about them being a thing as fact, on trying to make any excuse she can just to get away from him, even as he uses his station as the volleyball team's coach to leverage his position. While she isn't on the team, Shiho, An's best friend, is, and before Kamoshida came along, she was a star player with actual talents. But Kamoshida is now using them both against the other. An forced into Kamoshida's orbit to permit Shiho to remain part of the team, and Shiho being abused and injured instead of trained by the man every time An makes an excuse, like today, to keep him off of her, not so subtly threatening Shiho's well-being. For as we learn when we meet up with Ryuji and use the meta-nav to re-enter the palace and meet again with our resident cat burglar, Shiho isn't the only one. Kamoshida is doing this too. The palaces are a reflection of their creators. Every sin twisted and magnified and put on decadent open display. The other sections of the castle dungeons containing training rooms where the drills they run are nothing but torture exercises. Ryuji recognizing the entire volleyball team, as well as past members that didn't make the cuts, or have shown themselves to be in classes to be more and more injured. These are unfortunately not the actual shadows of these individuals, the cognitive clones manifested by the palace to assist in the palace ruler's twisted delusion, that these individuals are better off or are deserving of this treatment as slaves to their ruler's own glorification, which again helps the distorted delusion of the twisted shadow map that train of thought onto the ruler's counterparts. Everyone and anyone can and should be used for their own gain. Unfortunately, the Metaverse Navigator prevents the group from using the phones or any other technology as means of recording anything while inside the metaverse. Gee, I hope that won't result in a significant storyline plot hole far later in the game. So it's not like Ryuji can take photos of everyone here as evidence of their wrongdoing, as obviously evidence obtained in another world would be a bit suspect, or to better match the faces of those being abused to try to talk to them in confidence. Not like that would have worked either, though not for lack of trying. As shown earlier, Kamoshida's already poisoned both of them to the greater student body, so who would believe them even if they came forward? Again, this is insidious, as there are no legitimate real-world options for resolving this due to the psychological effect the palace is creating to make people trust the palace ruler above reproach, and not the ruffians storming at the gate trying to break it down. And Ryuji truly, desperately wants to make Kamoshida pay for his crimes, and for what he did to Ryuji in specific. For the previous year, Shujin also had a track team, one that was capable of being just as exalted as Kamoshida's volleyball team. Kamoshida destroyed them, and used Ryuji, their star runner, to do it. First getting himself assigned as their coach when their original supervisor was busy. Some parts of the game say the supervisor was fired, but the timeline's been muddied by the game's localization. And then putting them through training so harsh everyone was risking career-crippling injuries. Before Kamoshida played his final card, and used information gleaned from Ryuji's private records to insult Ryuji's mother. Ryuji's single mother. For those not in the know, this is one of several socio-cultural political things international players of this game seem to not get when the game explains it to them. The one presented here being that single parents raising their children by themselves in Japan is extremely stigmatized against, for reasons that are very stupid. And they usually refer to the greater society perceiving them as irresponsible, which ties back to that societal expectation for dads to be breadwinners and moms to be homemakers, and they can't be both as single parents without any other source of income. See how that hypocrisy within Japanese workplace culture tends to cycle itself back into these discussions? Hell, even deadbeat dads that force their wives to work while they do nothing are seen as a more respectable nuclear family than someone single raising their kid alone. Though some allowances are made in the events of, say, divorce, which is still considered taboo by other generations and has only lost much of its stigma in the last 20 years, or the loss of one of the parents due to tragedy. And single women are, of course, going to get it worse by the double standard of assuming the mother was a prostitute or just sexually loose that forgot birth control and kept the results. And not that maybe they wanted kids and the would-be father was the problem that the mother wanted nothing to do with anymore. As one of the cast members in the game is the bastard offspring of a man who slept around and forced himself onto women without care of the consequences. But that ain't Ryuji's dad. Ryuji's father instead was an abusive monster Ryuji's mom eventually just kicked out to raise him on their own. Hell, this game acts in defiance of a lot of Japanese sociocultural regressiveness by the fact it does feature several characters in it who were raised by single parents or guardians, some of whom they have no blood relation to, which runs the spectrum of different outcomes tied to their relative positions in society, and how they are viewed because of it. But Ryuji is certainly the most hostile take explicitly because it is that case of single mother that is the most culturally ostracized. So what Kamoshida did to antagonize Ryuji is outright call his mother a whore to his face. I cannot believe there are people who have played this game who do not get that. Because that isn't subtext. He did everything short of using that literal word only for the translation to obfuscate that fact just slightly more. And when he did, Ryuji snapped and attacked Kamoshida, the man exploiting Ryuji's exhaustion to get the upper hand and break Ryuji's leg, twisting it so he'll never be able to run as he did without pain again. Kamoshida used that as his excuse to get the track team disbanded, which turned Ryuji into a pariah, as no one believed him when he told them what Kamoshida did, nor considered the act of breaking a leg far beyond what one would call self-defense. But of course they wouldn't. After all, Kamoshida is a former Olympian. Such a hero couldn't possibly be bad. Yeah, no. The fact there was no formal investigation into this is what is actually terrible. And the incident being swept under the rug and being blamed on a student is grounds itself for a lawsuit. For if Ryuji was at fault, he'd have been expelled, not ostracized. But expelling him, like with what happened with Ren, would have left a paper trail regarding the larger context of the incident and the abuse Kamoshida was inflicting, and then all be one outside the influence of the palace would need to start smashing it down. So of course, cover-up and obfuscation of blame to let the guilty party walk. And King Kamoshida brings this all up as the group tries to leave with the leads they have, the shadows that make up his guard manifesting as a monster that neither Ren nor Morgana have the right elemental typing to deal with. So they are left subjugated, and Ryuji stuck facing down his own personal monster once again, with nothing to show for it, up until Kamoshida reveals one critical detail Ryuji had only suspected, but could never prove. That his broken leg was deliberate. And that ignites his spark, the spark of rebellion that breaks the perception filter's hold on one's mind, and why it actually is important narratively that such an effect exists. For that moment of epiphany focuses their clarity into a single sharp point and pops the bubble around their cognition that prevents them from realizing that things are wrong. Every persona awakening in this game forms on these same grounds, where the Shadow's voice, once pacified in their realm by a ruler, starts to scream loud and clear in their ears.
クズをかばって犬死にする救えないクズどもをな。
お前の方だよ。そう利用することしか考えてねえ。お前の方こそクズだ。カモシだ。にやけた面でこっち見てんじゃねえよ。随分と待たせたものよ。
Okay, this is Mamoru Miyano getting a transformation, so I need to make the right reference call. I can't use his time at Setsuna FSA as his Gundams didn't really transform and Trans Am does not count. His role as Kiba in Wolf's Rain was illusion-based, so that's no. Light Yagami didn't really transform as a character so much as reveal how malicious he actually was. I don't own a Keyblade by which to mimic Riku opening one's heart, and he never really did that much in comparison to Sora. Salad didn't really have any Pokemon with a transformation gimmick. Ultraman Zero is too obvious. So that basically just leaves Death Ryuger. Or rather, the pirated version.
どうせ消し合う旗にかかってきたお前の中でもう一人のそう望む我が何時だ覚悟して背負えこれよりは反逆のご苦労が貴様の旗だ
Ryuji's own persona is Captain William Kidd, a Scottish privateer and lifelong sailor who in the late 1600s was hired to hunt pirates, but was labeled a pirate himself after he captured a pirate ship captained by an Englishman, when his masters of the English crown expected him to turn over pirates that happened to be French or of color. In essence, he was driven to piracy by those in authority, turning against him for just doing his job and apprehending the criminals, after spending a life where he chafed against those in authority, abusing their power and defying the law themselves. An appropriate persona for Ryuji, then, as that is in turn what Ryuji himself has experienced, thus why his true self expressed himself as that rogue. But beyond Ryuji's own mask, manifesting as a skull, there's not a lot piratey that goes on with his outfits. In fact, Ryuji's Phantom Thief form takes more visual inspiration from Shotaro Ishinomori's The Skull Man, the manga which was the basis by which the original Kamen Rider series had been developed and reimagined from. Hell, Ryuji's outfit even has a typhoon-like belt buckle on his waist to make the reference all the more overt. But that doesn't share much commonality with a pirate. A bit of a mistake, for, as said, we get the more overt and direct Kamen Rider reference later on with the member of the cast whose persona manifests as a motorcycle, and whose theme of rebellion is more aligned with the nature of their sense of justice. I like the design of Ryuji's thief form, and I get why Captain Kidd was chosen as a persona. Hell, I can even tell you why lightning was chosen as Ryuji's element, as that is technically this same Tide actor illusion as well. But there is that consequential disconnect between the manifestation of one's soul and the outfit that expresses that manifestation and what the bearer considers to be a rebel. Hell, I'm pretty certain most Persona players outside of Japan didn't catch the Skullman homage, and I only know of it because I'm a Tokusatsu fan. But with Captain Kidd giving Ryuji lightning spells, which are the weakness of the guards King Kamoshida sends against us, Ryuji being a faster attacker, permitting him to hit hard and fast, allows us to escape as post-awakening fatigue hits Ryuji. But not before the now three thieves get insight into more of Kamoshida's delusion, and his deliberate targeting of An to slake his lusts, which riles Ryuji up again against the depravity, as now he's free from the influence of the perception filter, so he can realize how much danger from him she has been in, and isn't one of the man's sycophants.
てめえの化けの皮絶対ひっぺがしてやる首洗って待ってろ
見つかりたくないなら単独でやる方が効率的そういう考え方だってできるでも君は単独では行動しなかった協力者がいた方が利点がある君はそう判断した違う
鴨志田の歪んだ心ってのを見たらそれこそ放っておけないだろう頼んだぜ俺も気合い入れっからよ
我は汝汝は我汝ここに新たなるちぎりを得たりちぎりはすなわち囚われを破らんとする反逆の翼なり我戦車のペルソナの生誕に祝福の風を得たり自由へと至るさらなる力とならん
The social links of Persona 5 are referred to as the Confidant system, which to me ended up being really effective and rewarding. as not only does this system allow you to eventually summon stronger persona and get bonuses to fusing them into their arcana, leveling up the Confidants actually results in gameplay bonuses. For party members especially, as it can lead them to being able to attack immediately in a turn where a player knocks down an enemy, break the effect of a status ailment on a party member, withstand fatal attacks themselves, or protect Ren himself from a fatal attack. For advancing Ryuji's Confidant story, he specifically unlocks abilities tied into ambushing enemies, permitting one to insta-kill some foes, especially in the People's Palace known as Mementos, which will be introduced later. I also said earlier that thanks to Jun Fukuyama's character drawing so heavily on the leitmotifs of Lelouch, every major cast member of Persona 5, as well as many of the supporting characters, draws a parallel to characters from Code Geass. And let me reiterate that this does not mean these characters are the same as those from that series, merely that there are similarities with regards to character roles and personality and some designs, with some of their traits shuffled up between two or more characters, so one character with the same role in the story will not be presented as having the same personality. Some of this is admittedly superficial, but once my brain started making the comparisons, it was just hard to stop. And admittedly, not every character has one. But this begins with Ryuji being an amalgamated XP of the self-stated best friends of Lelouch and his alter ego Zero, rivals Cardamond and Shinichiro Tamaki, and that they are punkish goofballs, borderline idiots, more with how they are not good at academic matters than actually lacking intelligence or wit, and their personal priorities being out of balance. Though to many the comparison is fleeting due to Ryuji overall being a smarter individual than Tamaki, and Rivals himself is infamous as being such a complete nothing of a character in Code Geass' anime that some wonder why he was introduced to begin with, as due to the studio-mandated overfocus on CC, despite her irrelevance to the story causing character focus time to be stolen from other cast members, the most he ends up doing is being a freaking co-conspirator to Lelouch's gambling, and expressing a one-sided crush on the character Millie Ashford. But it is in that co-conspirator role that I saw Ryuji being like Rivals, or at least how Rivals could have been portrayed had the show ever allowed him to, have any form of character spotlights. Without he is Ren's bro and supportive of Ren's pursuits, just with Tamaki's mannerisms stapled atop them. Hell, the more I plumbed Code Geass Apocrypha, the more I felt the comparison fits. For there's always been speculation that had Rivals been read in on Lelouch's Zero identity, he would have filled a role similar to Tamaki, just being less likely to betray Lelouch over the plot arc. And, well, all three end up taking a butt monkey role in their stories as well. And it also ties into the Seiyu thing, as while these characters echo prior roles of the Japanese voice actors, it is not necessarily a one-for-one for any of them, permitting the role to have a distinct subversive flavor to them. In that respect, Mamoru Miyano, as that listing of roles I gave a couple minutes ago shows, tends to play either arrogant savants, as exampled by Ultraman Zero, Light Yagami, Night Hunter D, and Riku, or damaged individuals who have lost everything and are taking a stand against broken systems and false gods, as is seen of Setsuna F. Seiei in Gundam 00, and his role as Tusk from Cross-Ange Rondo of Angels and Dragons. So yeah, a character like Ryuji, who is a social misfit, thematically is his normal wheelhouse. But that's where the subversive element to the role is, in that Ryuji is only really competent as a runner. While he is not as stupid as Morgana and others in the story ridicule him for being, and him being a situational butt monkey is taken vastly too far in Persona 5, him being a character that is not the coolest man in the room, competent in intellectual pursuits, or is otherwise experienced with the situation he finds himself in, is a refreshing take for a Miyano role, as that's not something the actor gets to portray often. Ryuji's just a normal guy, and that's stimulating for him to actually play one for once, and not have them be the explicit special. Ryuji's overall mundanity helps keep the rest of the group grounded overall, and while he does come to embrace the Phantom Thief gig and gets excited at his chance to make the world better, we resultantly do not see him become overly reliant upon it to exclusion of all else as Ren does. This shown in his Confidant storyline. For after we deal with Kamoshida and have his crimes exposed, Ryuji acts to get himself back in shape, as their real-world skills do not translate into the group's capabilities in the metaverse, even restoring Ryuji's ability to run and ignore damage to his leg, but that only goes so far. with him noticing the difference of how he used to move. Thus he ropes Ren into training with him to get his mobility back, as Ryuji is very good when it comes to running, and can pass on the tricks he used to get so good before Kamoshida ruined everything, which draws the ire of Ryuji's former compatriots in the track team. For it wasn't just that Kamoshida used his provocations of Ryuji to get the track team disbanded, he did it right before a championship match they were all set to win, and had they won, Kamoshida's abuse of them, which is said was all done to sabotage the team so his volleyball team would be the award winner of the school, would have had to stop due to the spotlight on them which would have come from that victory. But Kamoshida pushed Ryuji's berserk button, that is his private family history, deliberately to ruin the team when they were at their height so they would fall and never return, the point at which the track team would most keep a grudge against their former star. And Ryuji does not blame them, for even if they were being influenced by Kamoshida to do as he wanted, that was still the mistake he made. And in order to grow, he has to own his role in it. The problem is the former track team members, when they cross paths, now take to being the same bullies Kamoshida himself was, and antagonize Ryuji directly over his familial situation, which shows the scars someone like Kamoshida leaves behind and those he victimized, to show the influence he had in the school, despite the eventual collapse of his palace, is not instantaneously undone, and the longer one is exposed to the effects of the palace altering one's cognition or reality, the more the effect does linger. Again, plot point relevant to the character arc of someone we'll be discussing in a few videos, and the fandom's complete inability to pick up on that, leading to several instances of media illiteracy. As the mental deception the track team is operating under is they all took the same abuse from Kamoshida, when that wasn't so. He had it out for Ryuji. But the only way they can justify to themselves that they did nothing to warrant the abuse is to leave Ryuji as their scapegoat and ostracize him unjustly. But that only shows how far they have all fallen, especially their de facto head, Nakaoka, that took the event the most personally. And I do say this is the lingering effect of the perception filter of Kamoshida's palace, as when Ryuji and Ren go to train in an actual gym, Ryuji runs into a former classmate of his named Ikeda, one that graduated and lost the chance to get a letter of recommendation that screwed over his college plans. But the distance from Kamoshida's palace has allowed him to shake off its influence and realize Ryuji wasn't at fault for it. Kamoshida never intended to do right by them the second he got control over the team. The problem is, with the school trying to brush Kamoshida's wrongdoing under the rug afterwards, the track team is restarted with a new advisor, named Yamuchi, and he is as bad as Kamoshida, previously having acted as the man's lapdog and second to influence the school by proxy of the king's will, to show that evil doesn't just die with the head of the snake. And as the Confidant story progresses, the lingering distortion has a risk of growing into a new palace to replace the old one. Yamuchi is already picking his targets to dismantle all opposition against him, Nakaoka being singled out in the same way Ryuji was to direct the ire of Kamoshida's abuse, framing Nakaoka as the one who ratted to him all their personal information, when a lot of that information was already in the students' records, and it was the abuse of that information by the teachers that screwed them. But as Ryuji and Ren overhear when Yamuchi is out with other teachers later on, the track team thinks Yamuchi is doing it for them, but he's really doing it just for himself, taking advantage of what was done to make himself famous, and blot out his own role in actively enabling Kamoshida. Fortunately, with Ryuji already suspicious of Yamuchi, Ryuji shows how smart he can be, and unlike when he tried to do so in the metaverse, there was nothing to prevent a simple audio recording from exposing Yamuchi's plan to exploit the team, and handing that over to them before they can be used. For in Ryuji's time with Ren, he's learned that, at the end of the day, you can't live by letting yourself be used by other people as their scapegoat. You can take blame for things you did wrong, but beyond that, you can't let yourself take that shit. You ultimately have to live your own life for yourself, no others, lest one be thrown into a trap that ruins one's future all on their own. In doing so, it settles the discourse between the track members, and they rally against Yamuchi's plans, succeeding in getting the original track coach back. And from such, Ryuji earns his redemption for his mistake, permitting him the wisdom to never commit it again.
本当はさ、 ずっと怖かったんだ。あいつらと向き合うの。てめえのバカさ加減思い出すし、あいつらの軽蔑の眼差しとか、何より居場所をなくしたこと、ずっと忘れらんなかったからさ。こういうの柄じゃねえし、なんて言っていいかよくわかんねえけど、お前がいてくれたから俺は変われた。ごたごたに巻き込んじまったけど、お前最後まで付き合ってくれたよな。俺を見捨てなかったよな。ありがとな。なんかあったら言えよ。今度は俺がお前を何があっても助けてやる。
我は汝、汝は我。汝ここにちぎりを血明の絆へと転生せしめたり、絆は反逆の翼となりて魂のくびきを打ち破らん。今こそ汝、戦車の究極なる非王に目覚めたり、無尽の力を汝に与えん。
感じるぜ、俺の新しい力。よし。
Which brings us to the final element of the Confidant system of this game, as from the framing device of Sai's interrogation, this is another detail revealed from it. One of the people that has been brought into our confidants, one of the people we have gained a social link with in this game, is a traitor, out for themselves, and sold Ren out by which to get him arrested, because their bond is all based on nothing but lies. So while Ren may strengthen his links to become a stronger persona wielder, that bond is not in fact a two-way street, as that confidant is in fact a flipped in reverse arcana, and that's something we haven't really seen in the Persona series before, or at least not in a way where it's a definitive way to read the game, story, and characters. Tarot cards by which the arcana system is based can have two interpretations of their meaning, depending on whether the card in question is right side up or placed in an opposing reverse position. In Ryuji's case, his aligned arcana of the Chariot, in its upright position, can find meaning in the terms succor, providence, presumption, triumph, vengeance, or trouble. In essence, it revolves around feelings of competition and overcoming oneself. We similarly saw this of Chie in Persona 4 as the Chariot-aligned member of that game, her training herself to compete against the person she was to overcome them, whereas Ryuji's was more literal in him being a former competitive track star who was wronged and held an open grudge, so unintentionally caused trouble. The reverse position Chariot, however, signifies disputes, arguments, and escalating animosity over failure. Basically, had Ryuji been a sore loser and lashed out at everyone around him for a screw-up instead of trying to ward people of Kamoshida's malice, taken it into his own hands to deliberately get revenge or publicly lashed out at his abusers, he could have come to represent the reverse side arcana. But as he does not, and because we can evolve our bond with him into a blood oath to legitimately make Ryuji into Ren's bro, hell, some people ship the two of them, as this is not the first time Jin Fukuyama and Mamoru Miyano have worked together to develop chemistry between them, that takes him off the table as a potential suspect for both Ren's future recollection as part of the story's framing device, as well as our experience within the game experiencing it linearly, which thus once more introduces the larger mystery aspect of the story in attempting to uncover who that traitor is, and add an additional encouragement for players to complete the Confidant stories, not just for the engagement with the characters as written, not just for the gameplay bonuses such provides, but to determine who was the one that left Ren to end up in the situation he found himself in. And that trifecta to me was all that was needed to make completing them become an even higher priority than they were before. And it actually is possible to complete all the Confidants in a single playthrough if you do things the right way. But there is a huge problem Atlas caused for itself. And that is, even with Atlas's no spoilers play mandates, everyone who actually took the time to look at the Japanese cast list immediately zeroed in on who the traitor was, thanks to the P5 characters acting as subversive takes on their prior roles. Thus, any form of public information Atlas gave us already gave that oh-so-precious secret they were protecting away. Thus, once more making their spoiler embargo utterly meaningless. I'm not going to discuss who it is until it is the proper time to do so, but it was widely guessed correctly who the traitor was, even earlier than players caught on to Adachi being the true killer of Persona 4. Basically, from the second the character was introduced, interacted with the cast if it hadn't been caught already. That's how much the actor-character allegory by itself, alongside the framing device, gave it away. Which brings us back to my opening statement that Atlas's insistence on screwing over streamers and online content creators just to protect this twist was pointless, as they did it themselves just by announcing who was cast in the game. Regardless, this video has once again been one that's gone on far too long. So to rewind things back to when Ryuji's Confidant was first gained, Ren and Ryuji go out for food after leaving the palace, to formulate their plan of attack, which involves confronting the real versions of the cognitions they saw being abused by King Kamoshida, to see if they could get any of them to admit what he's been doing to them. A pity, though, that they're already too late to help one of Kamoshida's greatest victims, as they were not made aware of the trouble she specifically was in.